That handwritten note on the kitchen counter demanded freedom, turning my perfect husband into a traitor in one heartbeat. He said do not look for him, so I did not. I filed for divorce immediately to free myself, but I never suspected his freedom was actually a calculated scheme to steal $5 million, leaving me set up as the perfect scapegoat for the law and the public to destroy. My name is Elena Corvus, and at 34 years old, I have built my entire life around the principles of precision and accountability. As a senior auditor at Stratos Dynamics, I am paid to notice what others miss, to find the discrepancies in the ledgers that suggest chaos beneath the surface. Yet, as I drove my sedan through the sheets of relentless Seattle rain after a grueling 10-day business trip to Chicago, I missed every warning sign in my own life. The windshield wipers slapped against the glass with a hypnotic rhythm, counting down the seconds until my reality shattered. I pulled into the driveway of our suburban home just past 11 at night. The house was completely dark. That was the first anomaly. Derek knew my flight schedule. He usually left the porch light on, a beacon of warmth against the gray Washington weather. I dragged my suitcase up the steps, the wheels rumbling loudly on the wet concrete. "Derek," I called out as I pushed the front door open. The silence that greeted me was not peaceful. It was hollow. The air inside felt stale, as if the house had been holding its breath for days. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door and walked straight to the master bedroom. The closet doors stood wide open. It looked like a gaping mouth. His side was bare. The suits, the casual shirts, the shoes all gone. Only empty wire hangers remained, clinking softly together in the draft from the hallway. I walked to the kitchen, my heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. There, in the center of the granite island, lay a single sheet of white notebook paper. It was anchored by the salt shaker. I picked it up. The handwriting was unmistakably his, scrawled in a hurry. "I need freedom. Don't look for me. I feel suffocated in this marriage." I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in my grip. The expected reaction for a wife in this situation would be to collapse, to wail, to slide down the kitchen cabinets in a heap of tears. But I am not that woman. Instead of sorrow, I felt a glacial wave of anger wash over me, stiffening my spine. It started at the base of my neck and spread downward, freezing my blood. "Coward," I whispered into the empty room. "You absolute, pathetic coward." He could not even look me in the eye. He had to run away like a thief in the night while I was working to pay our mortgage. My auditor's brain kicked into gear immediately, bypassing emotional devastation to focus on damage control. If he was running, he might have drained our finances. I pulled out my phone and logged into our joint banking app. I held my breath as the screen loaded. The balance flashed up $24,500.62. The money was untouched. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. If he had left the money, this was not a robbery. This was a midlife crisis. Or perhaps he had met someone else and was too ashamed to admit it. Whatever it was, he had made his choice. I scrolled through my contacts and dialed my personal lawyer, Sarah, despite the late hour. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice groggy. "Elena, it is. It is almost midnight. Is everything okay?" "No, Sarah, it is not," I said, my voice steady and devoid of tremors. "Derek is gone. He cleared out his closet and left a note saying he wants freedom. I want you to draft the divorce papers immediately. Cite abandonment. Elena, wait. Are you sure about this? Maybe you should wait 24 hours. People do stupid things when they are stressed. He might come back." He left me a note. "Sarah, he said he felt suffocated. I am not going to be the wife who sits by the window waiting for a man who walked out. I want to file for divorce, and I want a temporary restraining order on our assets just in case he decides to come back for the money later. Can you do it?" Okay, Elena. If that is what you want, I will have the draft ready by morning. I hung up and went to the garage. I grabbed a box of heavy-duty black trash bags. For the next 3 hours, I moved through the house like a tornado. I found everything he had missed. His toothbrush, the ugly ceramic mug his mother gave him, a pair of socks under the sofa. I threw them all into the bags. I dragged the bags out to the garage and tossed them next to the recycling bins. I was scrubbing his existence out of my space. I told myself that I would never search for a man who did not want to be found. My dignity was worth more than a dead marriage. The next morning, the rain had stopped. I drove to the courthouse and submitted the petition for a unilateral divorce. As I walked out of the building, the sun was trying to break through the clouds. I felt lighter. I felt a strange sense of relief, thinking the worst part was over. I had cut off the dead weight. I had absolutely no idea that I was not the one cutting ties. I was the one being cut loose, set adrift in a storm that was about to drown me. 3 days after I walked out of the courthouse, the fragile peace I had constructed for myself disintegrated. I was sitting at my desk on the 24th floor of Stratus Dynamics, reviewing a quarterly audit for a tech subsidiary, when the double glass doors of our department shattered inward, not physically, but the force with which they were thrown open made the entire room jump. FBI, nobody move. Hands away from your keyboards now. The command barked across the open plan office, freezing the hum of conversation and the clatter of typing. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned my swivel chair slowly, expecting to see a mistake, a drill, anything but the reality of 6 agents in windbreakers swarming toward my corner office. 2 uniformed police officers flanked them. Elena Corves, the lead agent, a man with a face carved from granite, stopped in front of my desk. He did not wait for an answer. Stand up, turn around, hands behind your back. What? What is this about? I stammered, my professional composure evaporating as my colleagues, people I had mentored, lunched with, and laughed with, stared in horrified silence. You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and conspiracy, the agent recited as cold steel clicked around my wrists. They dragged me into a conference room right there, turning the glass-walled space into an interrogation fishbowl for the whole company to see. They did not even wait to take me to the station to start the questions. Where is Derek Vance? The agent demanded, leaning over the table. I told you. I don't know, I said, my voice shaking. We are separated. I filed for divorce 3 days ago. Convenient, he sneered. He slammed a folder onto the table. We know about the $5 million. Elena, the Stratos Charity Fund, the one your husband managed, and the one you audited. I audited that fund 6 months ago. It was clean, I insisted. Look at the screen, he said, turning a tablet toward me. I stared at the digital display. It showed a series of wire transfers authorized 48 hours ago. $5 million, drained from the charity accounts and sent to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. And there, at the bottom of every authorization, was my digital signature. The encryption key only I possessed. The room spun. The air felt too thin. No, I whispered. This is impossible. My token. It never leaves my bag. Then it hit me. The questions about my security protocols. Derek borrowing my laptop to check sports scores while I showered. The sudden desire for freedom. He had not just left me. He had framed me. He did this, I said, my voice rising with panic. My husband. He set me up. That note. He left a note saying he needed freedom. We saw the divorce filing, the agent said, his voice flat and unimpressed. It looks like a classic exit strategy. You steal the money, file for divorce to create a narrative of estrangement, and then plan to meet up with him later. But you were too slow. They marched me out of the building. I saw the security guards escorting IT specialists to my desk to seize my computer. My career, built over 12 years of blood and sweat, was incinerated in less than 20 minutes. The next 48 hours were a blur of booking photos, fingerprints, and a bail hearing. My assets were frozen. My bank accounts were locked. I was released on a $200,000 bond, secured by my parents' retirement home, a guilt that weighed heavier than the shackles. A heavy black GPS monitor was strapped to my ankle. I was a prisoner in my own life. I took a taxi back to the house in the suburbs. When I opened the door, the smell of invasion hit me. The police had executed a search warrant. The sofa cushions were slashed. Drawers were dumped onto the floor. My books were torn from the shelves. It looked like a war zone. I stood in the center of the living room, feeling a profound, aching loneliness. My laptop had been seized, but I had an old tablet in the kitchen drawer that I used for recipes. I prayed they had missed it. I scrambled through the mess on the kitchen floor and found it under a pile of dish towels. I turned it on and logged into my personal email, hoping for a message from my lawyer. There was one new email in my inbox. The sender was a string of random alphanumeric characters. No subject line. I clicked it open. My blood turned to ice. It was a photograph. The angle was from the doorway of our bedroom. In the picture, I was asleep in bed. My hair fanned out over the pillow, oblivious and vulnerable. The timestamp was from the night before he left. Below the image was a single line of text. "Thanks for the freedom, wifey." If the legal system was a slow-moving beast, the media was a pack of starving hyenas. It took less than 48 hours for my name to become synonymous with greed. The narrative was spun with dizzying speed. I was no longer the abandoned wife. I was the Ice Queen auditor, the woman who drove her husband to the brink of despair and then framed him to steal $5 million. I sat in my living room with the curtains drawn, watching the morning news. My mother-in-law, Lydia Vance, was on the screen. She sat on a studio couch, clutching a handkerchief, looking every inch the devastated mother. Her makeup was done to highlight her pale complexion, making her look fragile, a stark contrast to the iron-willed matriarch I knew. Derek is a sensitive soul, Lydia told the interviewer, her voice trembling perfectly. He called me a week ago. He was crying. He said, "Mom, I can't breathe anymore. She watches everything I do. She tracks every penny. I think he was trying to leave her. And she found out." The interviewer leaned in, her face a mask of sympathetic horror. "And now he is missing. Mrs. Vance." "Do you fear for his safety?" Lydia looked directly into the camera, her eyes hardening for a fraction of a second before filling with fresh tears. "I am terrified. Elena is a very calculated woman. If Derek is gone, I just pray she hasn't done something permanent to keep him quiet." I turned off the television, my hand shaking with rage. She was accusing me of murder. She was painting me as a monster to cover her son's tracks. Outside, the reality of her performance was taking root. I peered through the blinds to see a neighbor, a man I had exchanged Christmas cards with for 5 years, tossing a bag of kitchen trash over my fence. On the driveway, someone had spray-painted the word "killer" in bright red letters. The sanctuary of my home had been breached not just by the police, but by the hatred of strangers. My phone rang. It was the head of human resources at Stratos Dynamics. "Elena," she said, her voice clipped and formal. "Given the severity of the charges and the negative publicity, we are invoking the morality clause in your contract. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." "You can't do this," I said, gripping the phone. "I am innocent. I have not been convicted of anything. The reputational damage is already done," she replied coldly. "We will mail you your personal effects. Do not come to the building." The line went dead. In one morning, I had lost my reputation, my community standing, and my career. I sat in the silence of the wrecked living room, the feeling of absolute isolation wrapping around me like a shroud. But in that silence, a memory surfaced. It was a small, insignificant moment from 2 months ago. Derek had been sitting in the home office while I worked. He had asked me about the two-factor authentication dongle I used for high-level transfers. So, that little numbers changes every 60 seconds he had asked, leaning over my shoulder. And you are the only one with the password to generate it. Yes, I had replied, laughing. Why do you ask just curious about your world, babe? It is fascinating. I realized then with a sickening clarity that my trust had been weaponized. He wasn't curious. He was taking notes. He had learned my passwords, watched my keystrokes, and waited for the perfect moment to steal the device. And Lydia. She was too polished, her narrative too tight. She wasn't just a grieving mother, she was the architect of the distraction. The tears that had been threatening to fall suddenly evaporated. The heat of humiliation cooled into something harder, sharper. They thought they had broken me. They thought that by stripping away my job and my husband, I would crumble. But they forgot what I did for a living. I was an auditor. I reconstructed the truth from the debris of lies. Okay, I said to the empty room. You want to play games? Let's play. I went to the basement. The police had taken my laptop, but they had missed the external hard drive taped to the underside of the old filing cabinet. I had backups of our personal finances going back 7 years. I brought the drive upstairs and plugged it into the slow, cracked tablet. I cleared off the dining table, pushing aside the remnants of the police search. This was no longer a home. It was a command center. I pulled up the spreadsheets. I began to look not at the money that was gone, but at the money that had moved before the end. You made a mistake somewhere. Derek, I muttered, my fingers flying across the touchscreen. You are arrogant, and arrogant men always leave a footprint. I would find it. And when I did, I would not just clear my name. I would burn their entire charade to the ground. The chaos of my living room faded into the background as I entered what I called the zone. This was the state of mind where emotions were suspended and only data existed. I was not a wife anymore. I was a forensic auditor dissecting a corpse, and the corpse was the $5 million missing from the Stratus Charity Fund. I projected the recovered spreadsheets onto the wall using a portable projector I had kept from my college days. The flow of money was sophisticated. I had to admit, the funds had not just vanished, they had been atomized. The $5 million had been broken down into hundreds of smaller transactions, routed through a dizzying array of shell companies registered in the British Virgin Islands, Panama, and the Seychelles. To the untrained eye, it looked like legitimate vendor payments for consulting and logistics. To me, it looked like layering. The second stage of money laundering, but criminals, no matter how clever, are creatures of habit. They leave fingerprints in the digital snow. I began to analyze the transaction reference codes. Most were random strings of alphanumeric characters, but a subset of them followed a specific syntax. Come on. Derek, I whispered, my eyes scanning the glowing numbers on the wall. You are not this smart. Who gave you the code? I noticed a recurring suffix 0812. I typed the numbers into my search bar. Nothing. Then I paused. August 12th. Lydia, I said aloud, the realization landing with a dull thud. It is her birthday. I cross-referenced the other codes. They matched the dates of her wedding anniversary, the date she founded her first company, and the date her husband died. It was narcissism encoded in theft. Derek had not just stolen the money, he had tagged it with his mother's milestones. I turned back to the cracked tablet. Derek was fastidious about his phone, but he treated this old device like a toy. He had logged out of his social media, but he had forgotten to sever the link to our shared cloud storage. I navigated through the directories, bypassing the family photos and tax returns. I found a hidden folder nested inside a directory labeled Gardening Projects. I tapped the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It was not photos of landscaping. It contained high-resolution scans of passports. There was Derek's face, staring back at me with that charming, vacuous smile I used to love. But the names were wrong. On one, he was a citizen of Portugal. On another, he was a national of St. Kitts and Nevis. You were never planning to come back, I murmured. You were planning to become someone else entirely. I dug deeper into the metadata of the cloud account. It synced with a travel app he must have deleted from his phone. The history showed a one-way ticket purchased 3 weeks ago. Destination a private airfield on an island off the coast of South America. He had not vanished into thin air. He had flown first class to paradise. But the final piece of the puzzle was the money's destination. The shell companies all fed into a single blind trust. I followed the paper trail of the trust's registration agent. It was buried under layers of legal jargon, but the beneficiary was listed as an entity called the LIV, Reborn Foundation. Lydia Vance. She was not just the grieving mother on television. She was the architect. She was the one washing the money. Derek was just the mule. I needed human intelligence to confirm the digital narrative. I thought of Jessica, Derek's former assistant. He had fired her 2 months ago for alleged incompetence, leaving her without a reference. At the time, I had sided with my husband. Now, I knew she was just loose ends being tied up. I found her number in my old contacts and dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice guarded. "Hello, Jessica. It is Elena Corvus. Please, do not hang up. Elena, I saw the news. I don't know what to say." If you are calling to ask me to testify against him, you should know I signed a non-disclosure agreement. I am not asking you to break a contract, Jessica. I am asking for the truth. He destroyed my life, just like he tried to destroy your career. I know about the money. I know about his mother. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, I heard a sigh that sounded like a heavy weight being dropped. He was a nightmare. Elena. The last few weeks. He was paranoid. He made me shred documents until my hands blistered. But there was one thing that was weird. Tell me, I urged, leaning closer to the phone. He had these private meetings. He cleared his schedule for them. He told me it was therapy. But I manage his calendar. I looked up the address once. It wasn't a therapist. Who was it? It was a lawyer named Marcus Thorne. I Googled him. He doesn't do divorces or estate planning. He specializes in non-extradition treaties and international asset protection. Derek wasn't depressed. Elena, he was studying. He was learning how to run away so that no one could ever touch him. Thank you, Jessica, I said, my voice steel. You have no idea how much you just helped me. I ended the call and looked at the wall of evidence. The picture was complete. Derek was the thief, Lydia was the mastermind, and I was the patsy. But they had made one fatal error. They assumed I would play the victim. They forgot that an auditor's job is to balance the books, and I was about to bring a world of deficit down on their heads. The silence of the suburbs was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Over the next 2 days, the sensation of being watched settled into my bones like a damp chill. A dark gray sedan with tinted windows was parked down the street every morning at 7 o'clock. When I picked up the landline to call my parents, I heard a faint, rhythmic clicking sound before the dial tone. They were tightening the noose, but they were not the police. The police did not hide in shadows. They banged on front doors. This was something else. It came to a head on Tuesday night at 2 in the morning. I was awake, analyzing the bank records again, when the sound of shattering glass from the kitchen downstairs sliced through the quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs. I did not scream. I grabbed the cracked tablet, the only repository of my evidence, and shoved it inside the hollow space behind the master bathroom vanity mirror. I had loosened the panel hours ago for this exact scenario. I grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the hallway table and pressed my back against the wall. Heavy footsteps creaked on the stairs. A figure dressed in black emerged from the shadows of the landing. He was not there to kill me. He was looking around, scanning the room with a tactical flashlight. He wanted the device. "Get out," I screamed, swinging the candlestick with all my strength. He blocked the blow with his forearm, grunting in pain, and shoved me hard against the wall. As he gripped my shoulder to pin me, the beam of his flashlight caught his hand. He was wearing a gold signet ring. Even in the chaos, the distinctive logo of a stylized eagle clutching a golf club burned into my retina. It was the Emerald Hills Country Club ring. Lydia Vance was the president of that board. You work for her. I gasped. He didn't speak. He shoved me to the floor and bolted down the stairs, realizing the element of surprise was gone. The next morning, my phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown number. I pressed record before answering. Elena, dear. Lydia's voice poured through the speaker, sweet as poisoned honey. I heard you had a fright last night. How terrible. What? What do you want from me? I asked, forcing my voice to tremble. I needed her to think I was breaking. I want to help you, she cooed. This trial will destroy you. Why not just take the plea deal? Admit you made a mistake. If you do, I can ensure a very generous deposit is made into an offshore account for you. Say, $200,000. When you get out in a few years, you can start fresh. I didn't steal it. Lydia, Derek did. Where is he? I sobbed into the receiver, clutching the counter to steady my shaking hands. Is he even alive? Oh, stop the dramatics, she snapped, her mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Derek is very safe and very happy, far happier than he ever was with you. Just take the fall. Elena, don't be stupid. I ended the call and saved the file. Derek is safe and happy. It was an admission that he was not missing, but it wasn't enough to prove where he was. I emailed the audio file and the scans of the fake passports to the lead detective using an anonymous encrypted server. I waited by the phone, hoping for a breakthrough. When he finally called me back, his tone was mocking. Mrs. Corves, we received your little tip, he said. If you spent half as much time on your defense as you do on Photoshop, you might actually have a case. Those passports are obvious forgeries. Stop wasting our time. They thought I was manufacturing evidence to distract them. I realized then that I was truly alone. The law would not save me. I had to get something undeniable. I waited until noon, then drove my car to the end of the block and parked it, switching to a rental car I had booked under my maiden name. I drove to Lydia's estate and waited. At 1:30 in the afternoon, her Bentley pulled out of the gates. I followed her, keeping 2 cars between us. She drove into the city, bypassing the main financial district and heading toward a nondescript building in the industrial sector. It was a private wealth management firm, the kind that did not have ATMs or signs. I parked across the street and watched. 20 minutes later, Lydia emerged carrying a thick leather duffel bag. She did not get back in her car. Instead, she walked to a waiting black SUV and handed the bag to a man in a leather jacket. It was a cash handoff. I raised my phone to take a picture, but the flash reflected off the rental car's window. The man looked up. He pointed right at me. Damn it, I cursed. I threw the car into reverse just as the SUV peeled away from the curb, tires screeching. I slammed on the gas, merging onto the highway ramp with reckless speed. The SUV was right behind me, its grille filling my rear-view mirror. We hit the Interstate 5 corridor at 80 miles per hour. The rain had started again, turning the asphalt into a slick, dangerous ribbon. The SUV rammed my bumper, sending a jolt through my spine. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white. "You want to play," I yelled, adrenaline flooding my system. I saw a semi-truck in the right lane. I feigned a move to the left, then swerved violently to the right, cutting directly in front of the truck. The truck driver blasted his horn, a deafening roar, but I squeezed through the gap. The SUV tried to follow but was cut off by the massive rig. I watched in the rearview mirror as the black vehicle was forced to slow down, disappearing behind the wall of traffic. I took the next exit, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my chest. I was alive, and I knew exactly where the money was going. I drove 2 hours east, past the city limits, and into the dense, pine-covered foothills of the Cascades to find the one man who hated Lydia Vance more than I did. Arthur Vance, Derek's father, lived in a rusted A-frame cabin that looked like it was being reclaimed by the forest. He had vanished from Derek's life 20 years ago, erased by Lydia's lawyers and checkbook. I knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held the same terrified emptiness I had seen in Derek just before he disappeared. "You must be the new victim," Arthur said, not stepping aside. "I am the wife she is trying to send to prison," I replied. "I need to know how she operates." He let me in. Over a cup of bitter black coffee, he laid out the autopsy of his own marriage. "Lydia does not love people, Elena. She acquires them," Arthur said, staring into his mug. "She orchestrated my bankruptcy. She hid assets in my name, then tipped off the IRS. By the time the dust settled, she had full custody of Derek and I was destitute. She raised that boy to be a golden retriever who fetches cash on command. He does not know how to be a man. He only knows how to be an asset." I sat back, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. Derek's note about freedom was not a lie. He did want freedom. He wanted financial independence from a mother who controlled his every breath. But in his weakness, he had let her orchestrate his escape, trading one cage for another. I drove back to the city with a new plan. I needed to locate him, and to do that, I had to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a criminal. I parked outside a coffee shop with public Wi-Fi and initiated a social engineering attack. I used a voice modulation software to lower my pitch slightly and spoofed the caller ID to match the internal help desk number of the private bank Lydia used. I dialed the direct line of the junior account manager handling the Vance portfolio. "This is Sarah from IT Security," I said, my voice clipped and urgent. "We are flagging a suspicious login on the Vance secondary account. Mrs. Vance is screaming at my director right now. I need you to confirm the last IP address used to access the portal so I can whitelist it, or heads are going to roll. Do you want to be the one to tell Lydia Vance her son is locked out of his funds?" No, please," the young man stammered on the other end. "I see the login here. It is an international IP, 190.12. He read off the string of numbers. I typed them into my tracking software as he spoke. "Got it. Whitelisting now. You saved the day," I said, and hung up. I traced the signal. It did not bounce through a proxy server. Derek had gotten sloppy. The IP address resolved to a dedicated server at the Paraíso Azul, an ultra-exclusive gated resort compound in Costa Rica. It was a haven for fugitives with money, a place with no extradition treaty for white-collar crimes if you paid the right government officials. I hacked into the resort's guest registry using a brute force decryption tool on their weak firewall. There was no Derek Vance listed, but in the penthouse suite, checked in 3 days ago, was a Mr. Alexander Frey. I dug deeper into the concierge notes attached to the profile. There was a scheduled appointment for the following Tuesday with a private surgeon in San Jose for facial reconstruction and rhinoplasty. "You are going to change your face," I whispered to the screen. "You really are trying to disappear." I had the location. I had the alias. But I needed something irrefutable. I needed to catch them conspiring. I contacted a private investigator I had worked with on a fraud case years ago. He rented me a high-frequency signal interceptor, a device that looked like a rugged radio receiver. Then I set the trap. I went to an encrypted online forum frequented by Lydia's lawyers and posted a fabricated anonymous tip claiming that a private storage unit registered to Derek Vance had been discovered in Seattle, containing $2 million in cash. I knew Lydia monitored these channels obsessively. Then I drove to the perimeter of Lydia's estate and waited in the darkness. The interceptor hummed on the passenger seat. It took less than an hour. The light in Lydia's study snapped on. The signal strength on my receiver spiked. She was making a call on a burner phone. I adjusted the frequency until the static cleared and her voice cut through the speaker, sharp and panicked. "You idiot. You told me you moved all the cash," Lydia screamed. "I did. I swear I did." "Mom," Derek's voice came through, sounding tinny and distant, but unmistakably him. "There is no storage unit. It is a lie. Someone is messing with us. If the police find that money, they will trace it back to the trust. You need to move again. Alexander. Tonight. Do not go to the surgery. Get on the boat to Panama." "I can't. I'm scared." "Mom, I want to come home." "You have no home," she hissed. "Stay put until I tell you otherwise." I hit the save button on the recording. The audio file saved to my drive. A digital smoking gun. I had them. I knew where he was. I knew his alias, and I had his mother commanding him to flee. The puzzle was finished. Now it was time for the execution. I looked down at the black plastic GPS monitor strapped to my ankle. It was a symbol of the system that had failed me, a system that demanded I sit still while my life was dismantled. I was done waiting for permission. I used a pair of industrial bolt cutters I had bought from a hardware store to snap the band. The moment it severed, I knew the silent alarm was triggering at the marshal's office in Seattle. I had maybe 40 minutes before they locked down the airports, but I was not flying commercial. I was already at a private airstrip, boarding a charter flight paid for with the last of my liquidated savings. 7 hours later, the humid heat of Costa Rica hit me like a physical wall. I checked into a budget hotel near the Paraíso Azul resort, discarded my business attire, and transformed. I put on a wide-brimmed sun hat, oversized designer sunglasses, and a flowing beach cover-up. I looked exactly like the wealthy, aimless tourists that populated this coast. Getting into the resort was surprisingly easy. Confidence is the best key. I walked past security with a wave and a smile, heading straight for the pool deck, and there he was. Derek was lounging on a white chaise, a cocktail with a little umbrella in his hand. He looked tan, relaxed, and utterly alive. He was laughing at something a young woman in a red bikini was saying. The man who claimed to be suffocating in our marriage was breathing quite easily now. I pulled out my phone, keeping it low, and snapped a dozen high-definition photos. I captured his face, his tattoo, the drink in his hand. Proof of life. He stood up and sauntered toward the open-air bar. I followed, my heart pounding a war drum against my ribs. I waited until he ordered. Then I slid onto the bar stool right next to him. "I will have a vodka tonic," I said to the bartender, keeping my voice level, "and another round for my husband. He is celebrating his freedom." Derek froze. His hand, reaching for his drink, stopped in midair. He turned his head slowly, like a rusted machine. When his eyes met mine behind my sunglasses, the color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. "Elena," he whispered, his voice cracking. You are supposed to be in jail." How did you find me?" "You left a digital trail a mile wide." "Derek," I said, taking off my sunglasses. "Did you really think you could frame me for $5 million and I would just roll over?" He looked around frantically, checking for police. When he saw no uniforms, his shock curdled into a sneer. He took a gulp of his drink. "It doesn't matter," he hissed. "You can't touch me here. No extradition." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why destroy me? I didn't want to," he shouted, drawing stares from nearby tables. "It was Mom. Her real estate company is $300 million in debt. She was going to lose everything. She made me do it. She said you were the perfect cover because you are so meticulous. Nobody would suspect the auditor until it was too late." "And the note I asked," leaning in, "the part about feeling suffocated?" He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. "Mom wrote that. She said, 'Elena is a romantic fool. Give her a tragedy and she will accept it.' And you did. You filed for divorce immediately. You played your part perfectly, you stupid cow. I smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever worn. I pointed a finger at my purse, which was propped up on the bar counter, the phone camera lens facing us. I think you should apologize, I said softly, for what he spat. For lying to the 2.5 million people watching this live stream right now. His eyes bulged. He looked at the phone. The screen was lit up with a torrent of comments scrolling so fast they were a blur of rage. Hearts, angry faces, and shock emojis flooded the display. No, he gasped. No. You didn't. I did. And I am sure your mother is watching too, although, knowing Lydia, she is probably faking a heart attack right now to avoid the reporters banging on her door. Panic overtook him. The realization that his sanctuary was gone, his anonymity shattered, and his mother exposed snapped something in his brain. "Give me that phone," he screamed. He lunged at me, his fingers clawing for the device. He expected the wife who used to cry during sad movies. He did not expect the woman who had spent the last week fueling herself on pure rage. I didn't flinch. As his arm came down, I sidestepped and caught his wrist. I twisted his arm behind his back, using the leverage to slam his chest hard against the bar counter. He cried out in pain. I kicked his legs out from under him, driving him to the floor, and pinned his arm against his shoulder blade until he whimpered. "Do not move," I commanded, my voice booming over the silence of the stunned bar patrons. "Someone call the local police. Tell them I have detained an international fugitive." I looked down at the man I had once vowed to love forever. He was sobbing into the floor tiles, broken and pathetic. I felt absolutely nothing for him but disgust. The camera was still rolling, broadcasting his defeat to the world. The nightmare was ending, and I was the one waking up. The wheels of international justice, usually rusted and slow, turned with terrifying speed once the world was watching. Interpol agents took custody of Derek at the San Jose airport less than 6 hours after my live stream ended. He was not the confident man sipping cocktails by the pool anymore. He was a trembling wreck in a jumpsuit, flanked by federal marshals who looked at him with undisguised contempt. I flew back to Seattle on a commercial flight, expecting to be arrested the moment I stepped onto the jet bridge for violating my bail conditions. The police were there, waiting. They cuffed me, but the handcuffs felt different this time. They were a formality. By the time I reached the interrogation room, the district attorney himself was waiting for me, and the cuffs were removed. "Mrs. Corves, I apologize for the restraints," he said, sliding a glass of water across the metal table. "Your stunt in Costa Rica was reckless, illegal, and completely brilliant. You did our job for us. I want immunity," I said, my voice flat, "for the travel violation and for the hacking. And I want to be in the room when you question them." "Done," he replied immediately. "But we have a problem. Lydia Vance is stonewalling. She claims she knew nothing about Derek's theft. She says she is a victim of a rogue son. We need to nail the coffin shut." I reached into my bag and pulled out the hard drive I had retrieved from behind the bathroom mirror. "Here are the bank transfers," I said. "You will see $5 million leaving the charity fund, bouncing through the Caymans, and landing in the LV, Reborn Foundation. And here are the withdrawal records from that foundation paying off the debts of Vance Real Estate Holdings. Derek stole the money, but Lydia spent it." 2 hours later, they arranged the confrontation. It was a strategy designed to break them. They placed me, Derek, and Lydia in the same room. The air was so thick with tension, it felt toxic. Lydia sat perfectly upright, her face a mask of aristocratic disdain. Derek slumped in his chair, looking at the floor. "I have no idea why I am here," Lydia announced, smoothing her skirt. "My son has clearly lost his mind. He stole from his wife's company and ran away. I am as shocked as anyone." Derek's head snapped up. "Mom, You told me to go. You bought the ticket. I did no such thing, Lydia retorted, her voice icy. You came to me begging for help because you were in trouble. I gave you some travel money because I am a mother, and I pitied you. I didn't know you were a criminal. Pitied me. Derek's voice rose, cracking with emotion. You orchestrated the whole thing. You said the company was going under. You said we had to sacrifice Elena to save the family legacy. Lydia turned to the prosecutor, ignoring her son completely. Officer, my son has always been weak. He is incompetent with money and prone to fantasies. It seems he tried to embezzle this money to prove he was a big shot, and now that he is caught, he is trying to blame his poor mother. It is pathetic. Really. The room went silent. I watched Derek's face. I saw the exact moment his heart shattered. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman he had become a felon for, was discarding him like a used tissue. He began to laugh. It was a dry, broken sound. Weak, Derek whispered. You think I am weak? He turned to the district attorney, his eyes burning with a manic intensity. I want a deal, Derek said. I will give you everything, not just the charity fund. I will give you the tax evasion from 1998. I will give you the construction bribes from 2005. I will tell you where she hides the diamonds she bought with the insurance fraud money. Derek, shut your mouth, Lydia screamed, losing her composure for the first time. She lunged across the table, her fingernails clawing at him, but the guards restrained her instantly. It is all in the safe behind the painting in the library, Derek shouted over her screams, tears streaming down his face. The combination is 081244. That is her birthday, and the day Dad left her, I sat there, perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I did not need to speak. I did not need to scream. I just watched as the two people who had treated me like a pawn tore each other apart. It was grotesque, and it was justice. While they were screaming in that gray room, a tactical team was breaching the front gates of the Vance estate. I was told later that they seized everything. The vintage cars, the art collection, the jewelry, all of it confiscated as proceeds of crime. The empire Lydia Vance had built on lies was being dismantled brick by brick, and her own son was holding the sledgehammer. The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to crack the air in the courtroom, signaling the end of the chaos that had consumed my life for 3 months. Because of the avalanche of evidence I had provided, the digital footprints, the recorded phone calls, and Derek's desperate, sprawling confession, the judicial process was shockingly swift. The court had no patience for Lydia's theatrics or Derek's tears. Derek stood before the judge, his shoulders slumped, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for embezzlement, wire fraud, and identity theft. Lydia, identified as the mastermind who had manipulated her own son into becoming a criminal, received a harsher sentence. She was given 20 years for money laundering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. As the bailiffs led them away, Lydia did not look at her son. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of cold fury, while Derek looked back at me one last time. His eyes were empty, devoid of the man I thought I had married. When the judge officially declared me innocent of all charges and ordered my record expunged, I expected to feel a surge of joy. Instead, I felt a quiet, heavy stillness. The war was won, but the battlefield of my life was scorched earth. A week later, a courier arrived at my temporary apartment with a thick envelope from Stratus Dynamics. It contained a formal letter of apology signed by the entire board of directors and a new contract. They offered me my old position back with a title promotion and double my previous salary. They wanted to buy my silence and my forgiveness. I picked up the phone and dialed the CEO directly. "Elena," he said, his voice dripping with relief. "We are so glad you received the package. We made a terrible mistake, and we want to make it right. The team is lost without you. I am not coming back, Jonathan, I said, my voice steady. But look at the offer, he stammered. We are doubling your compensation. We will issue a press release clearing your name. What more do you want? I want a life that is not defined by ledgers and corporate betrayal. I replied, I don't fit in that world anymore. Keep your money. I hung up and felt the first true spark of liberation. I realized I could no longer spend my days protecting the assets of faceless corporations. I had learned how easily a woman could lose everything because she trusted the wrong person, and I wanted to use that knowledge. I put the house in the suburbs on the market the next day. I could not live there anymore. Every corner held a memory of a lie. I sold it to a young couple who knew nothing of its history, and I used the proceeds to lease a small, warm office space in the city. I placed a modest brass plaque on the door that read, Corv's Financial Consulting. My mission was specific. I would help women navigating divorce to find the assets their husbands were trying to hide. On my last day in Seattle before moving into a smaller apartment near the water, I met Arthur Vance at a coffee shop. He looked older, more tired, but there was a peace in his eyes that had not been there before. I went to see him, Arthur said, staring into his black coffee. He cried the whole time. He blames her, of course. He still hasn't learned to take responsibility. I am sorry it ended this way. Arthur, I said gently. I know he is your son. Do not be sorry, Arthur said, reaching across the table to pat my hand. You did what I was too weak to do 20 years ago. You stopped the poison. If you hadn't fought back, if you had just let them win, they would have destroyed you and moved on to the next victim. You cut the head off the snake. I walked away from that meeting and headed down to the waterfront. The famously gray Seattle sky had cleared, leaving a crisp, blue expanse over the Puget Sound. The air smelled of salt and pine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air. I stood by the railing, watching a ferry cut through the dark water. I was alone. I had no husband, no corporate career, and the future was uncertain. But my conscience was clear, and my fear was gone. That was the only freedom that mattered. I had walked through the fire and survived, and for the first time in a long time, I was ready to see what the next chapter would bring. It has been exactly 1 year since the gavel fell, and today, the ghosts of the past tried to knock on my door one last time. I received a letter in the mail. The envelope was plain white, stamped with the grim seal of the Federal Correctional Institution. The handwriting was shaky, but I recognized the loop of the letters immediately. It was Derek. I stood by the shredder in my new office, holding the paper that had traveled from his cell to my sanctuary. He wrote about regret. He wrote about finding God and attending therapy groups. He promised that once he served his 15 years, he would work 3 jobs to pay me back every cent of the emotional debt he owed. Please, Elena, just write back. Tell me you forgive me, he had scrawled at the bottom. I looked at the words and waited for the anger to rise. I waited for the grief, or even a flicker of pity for the man who was rotting in a cage of his mother's making. But there was nothing. My heart remained steady, beating with a calm, rhythmic strength. He was a stranger to me now, a character in a bad book I had finished reading a long time ago. I did not need his money, and I certainly did not need his apologies. I fed the letter into the shredder. The machine whirred, slicing his desperate pleas into thin, illegible strips of confetti. It was the final period at the end of a long, painful sentence. I turned away from the machine and looked out at the bustling reception area of my firm, Phoenix Financial Justice. The name was cliché, perhaps, but it fit. We rose from the ashes. My team was small but lethal. We were forensic accountants, paralegals, and investigators dedicated solely to one purpose: helping women whose partners were trying to starve them out financially during a divorce. My assistant knocked on the doorframe. Elena, Mrs. Henderson is here. She is pretty shaken up. Send her in, I said, smoothing my blazer. A young woman walked in. She looked exactly like I did that rainy night in Seattle. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands were trembling, and she looked as if the ground had dissolved beneath her feet. She sat down, clutching a crumpled tissue. "He left yesterday," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He cleared the savings account. He said I was suffocating him and he needed to find himself." The words were an echo, a haunting refrain that used to make me freeze. Now, they just ignited a fire in my belly. I walked around my desk and sat in the chair next to her, leaning forward. "Did he take the laptop?" I asked softly. "No," she sniffed. "Just his clothes and the cash." "Then he made a mistake," I said, a small, sharp smile playing on my lips. "And we are going to make him regret it. We are going to take it all back." She looked at me, and for the first time, a spark of hope lit up her eyes. That look was why I woke up every morning. That evening, I stood before the full-length mirror in my bedroom. The woman staring back was not the naive auditor who believed in happy endings and handwritten notes. She was sharper, harder, but also more vibrant. The lines around my eyes were no longer from worry. They were from the intense focus of building an empire. I had stopped looking for the husband who left, and in doing so, I had found the woman who stayed. I realized then that the greatest revenge was not seeing Derek in a jumpsuit or watching Lydia lose her mansion. Those were just consequences. The true revenge was this: living a life so full, so successful, and so radiant that their existence became completely irrelevant to my happiness. I took a taxi to the most expensive steakhouse in the city. I did not wait for a date or a friend. I requested a table for one by the window overlooking the harbor. When the waiter poured a glass of vintage Cabernet, I held the crystal stem against the light. "Is there a special occasion, ma'am?" the waiter asked politely. "Yes," I replied, looking at the dark wine swirling in the glass. "I am celebrating an anniversary." "Happy anniversary. To love," he suggested. "No," I smiled, clinking the glass softly against the air. "To freedom." The freedom Derek had claimed to want was a lie, a cover for cowardice and theft. But the freedom I had now, it was real. It was earned in the trenches of betrayal and forged in the fires of justice. I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air. The city lights were dazzling, reflecting off the wet pavement. I walked with a purposeful stride, the sharp click of my high heels echoing on the concrete like a drumbeat. I was alone, I was wealthy, and I was unbroken. I walked into the future, head held high, leaving the shadows behind me forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story.